the COVID madness. As you know, more cases out of New South Wales today sent the country into a panic.
Unfortunately, since 8 p.m. last night, New South Wales has recorded an additional 13 cases of community transmission.
Now, South Australia and plenty of others decided to react to, well, exactly as you would expect.
The situation in New South Wales is deteriorating. There are additional exposure sites, and of course the number of new infections has increased.
We know, we're going well here in Queensland, and we want to continue to keep Queenslanders safe.
Well, of course, their reaction is garbage. It is unjustified. And let me show you the facts tonight that you have not seen on the 6 p.m. news, that you don't hear on the radio, that you barely see anywhere online. I have to keep doing this because it's time to bust some of the COVID myths and the myths about what is happening right now in Sydney, including myth number one, that this thing is all over Sydney. Let me show you the facts. Sydney has 35 local government areas. There are active cases in 10 of those council areas. But how's this? There are just 2 that have more than 2 cases. Waverley in the east, Wollongong to the south of the city have 8 and 5 cases respectively. And then 4 councils have a shocking 2 cases each. Think about all of the lockdown that's happened. Think about all of the shutout, including the idiot in Western Australia who's decided to say no one from even New South Wales can go in. Bayside, Ryde, Sydney, Wallara, all of those, 2 cases. And then there are 4 other council areas that have just 1 case each. Think about this, in a city of 5, almost 6 million people. We're talking about 25 people in 10 council areas, and only 2 have got more than 2 cases. Camden, Ku-ring-gai, the Shire, and the Hill Shire as well. But there is a competition amongst idiot state premiers to pretend that they somehow keep you safe by keeping your fellow Australian out. None worse than the Emperor in Western Australia, Mark McGowan, who has slammed the door to everyone from New South Wales.
New South Wales is obviously undergoing a serious outbreak, and we can't run the risk of that being imported into Western Australia.
Now, this is absolute garbage. So put simply, there are multiple airports outside of Sydney where people would be able to get a connecting flight to somewhere like Brisbane or the Gold Coast and come to Perth. They are from areas that have 0 cases, yet this idiot is going to try to keep the people of Western Australia in fear of their fellow Australian. So myth number one, this thing is not all over Sydney. But also, the punitive and heartless way that this guy decides to keep people scared in Western Australia is that he shut the borders and people who were mid-flight were being turned around. This is some of the stuff that was happening at Perth Airport today. And one of the people who was caught by this, despite the fact that they hadn't been to a hotspot and do not have coronavirus, is the bloke who was able to rig the Logies a couple of years ago, the comedian Tom Gleeson. Now, Tom Gleeson tweeted today that he just arrived in Perth after being given exemption to come to Perth, but then was told, no, not allowed. This is despite the fact that he'd been to no exposure sites, no hotspots, and he was fully vaccinated. Now, this is a huge issue for the country right now, because people who are vaccinated need to be treated differently than those who are not, in terms of these punitive and ridiculous shutdowns that are happening everywhere. We have examples all over the country, including parents who were fully vaccinated who weren't able to see their newborn baby until almost a week after he was born.
We were told that she could have her phone with her and we could video call throughout the process. That promise was quickly turned to a no. And then she went through the C-section on her own. And in her words, I didn't get to see my son. He was taken away very quickly and he was behind the curtain and they could have just moved the curtain.
For days, a man has not been able to see his dying father in Queensland, despite the fact that he and his wife are fully vaccinated.
It's heartbreaking. He's he's hanging on there, but he's very weak. So it's unfortunate, but we're cautiously optimistic.
Now, the good news in the past hour is that the things have started to fall his way, but why did that take more than a week? And at the heart of the idiocy that is in part telling people it doesn't matter if you are vaccinated is what I have been showcasing on this program for weeks. Here is the logic of one of the people who is allegedly keeping you safe, who effectively is telling you it doesn't matter if you are vaccinated, the Queensland Health Minister.
What we know of the vaccine so far is what they do is they protect you. So they stop you from getting very, very ill and likely to end up in ICU or losing your life. But it doesn't stop you carrying the virus and potentially transmitting it to someone else.
Now, this brings me to the second COVID myth that we have to break tonight. Firstly, it's not all over Sydney right now. Secondly, we need to break this idea that it doesn't matter if you are vaccinated. So here's what I'm suggesting, and this must be agreed by federal and state leaders as soon as possible. I'll put this to the Prime Minister tomorrow night on this program, here, 9 o'clock Eastern Time on Sky News. If you are vaccinated from tomorrow, you should be exempt from all state border closures. If you are vaccinated, you should be able to travel overseas and to be able to come home for home quarantine. The local restrictions on your movement, like the 5Ks, the 25Ks, the don't leave your home, all of that rubbish should not apply to vaccinated Australians. And we have the absurdity in Sydney that everyone in an office, even in the majority of council areas that have 0 cases, or 8 of the 10 that have 2 or fewer cases, will have to wear masks while at their desks. It's ridiculous. Now, why does this matter? I'm not pushing vaccines for the sake of pushing vaccines. I want to show you what vaccination means. There are webcams all over the world that can show us locations all over the world, tourist hotspots. This is Times Square in New York City. This was them today. Nighttime their time, daytime our time. Lots of people milling around. But guess what? New York had 266 cases today. In California, just outside of Los Angeles, Anaheim, this is Disneyland. Los Angeles had today 125 cases. Now have a look at Sydney. This is Bondi Junction, where today they had 15 new cases, 25 across the whole city, and no one. You could fire the ordinance I was holding before. Meantime, in Melbourne, where they had 0 cases today, our mate Sophie Ellsworth took this photo of one of the main shopping districts. So here's the deal. The rest of the world is showing us that if you are vaccinated, the lockdown rules shouldn't apply to you. Because we need to motivate people to get vaccinated, because I don't trust these idiots who run the states anymore. The people who don't know the difference between state and city, the people who don't know the difference between fully vaccinated and somebody who was carrying the cough. Now, Australia does need to do better when it comes to those of us that are willing to get vaccinated. Because here's the thing, the politics will have you believe that there's millions of people who want to get vaccinated tomorrow, but it's just not available. That's not true. These rules need to be to make sure that people know that one of the advantages, apart from not getting the virus, of being vaccinated, that all these stupid rules don't apply to you, will supercharge the number of people who will get the vaccine. Because as we saw in Melbourne, the only reason that Victoria is close to 1 million people who've had at least 1 dose is because literally they were locked up for 2 weeks. It can't keep happening like this. Now, here's the good news. 6 million, almost 7 million people in Australia have at least had 1 dose. That means within a couple of months, bang, 6, almost 7 million people will be fully vaccinated. Every one of those people should be exempt from these stupid rules that have been put in place. It is beholden to every leader everywhere at every level to agree that the way out of these handcuffs is to be vaccinated. Because otherwise, it would be fair for any normal Australian to say, what's the point? Why bother? Why rush? Because even though you mightn't be fully vaccinated after your first shot, you might have to wait for your second, and depending on what your age group is about what version of the vaccine that you get, you would be able to know that, okay, these school holidays are stuffed, but what about the ones in September? We can book for those because we'll be fully vaccinated. We can make Christmas holiday plans. We can decide that it's time to go back overseas because we are fully vaccinated. And today, the Army officials who are now in charge of the rollout helped explain how they hope to supercharge this process. Because I repeat, it is not that demand is outstretching supply. It's that not enough people are getting vaccinated because, as we saw in Melbourne, 1 million people have done that. Other states, like here in Queensland, are nowhere near that number. Here's the ADF bosses talking about that today.
This is giving the states all of the best information we can to help them plan to get all of the vaccinations that we can provide to their citizens as quickly as possible.
There remains a place for AstraZeneca for those of which that remains preferred, and the continued production of that vaccine will continue to provide us additional options for not only helping ourselves but helping our partners in the region as well.
Which brings us to the third COVID myth that we must bust tonight. Share this video to your friends who don't believe you. I'm basing this off the data, the freely, publicly available data. I'm not making this stuff up. Now, you have heard uphill and down Dale about the Delta strain. And they would have you believe that the Delta strain is apparently so wild, so crazy, that any exposure to it is virtually guaranteed that you are going to get the virus. You've seen all sorts of state leaders all day and for multiple weeks now constantly talk about the Delta strain virus.
The Delta variant of the COVID virus is actually a gold medalist when it comes to jumping from one person to another.
The Delta variant seems to be the dominant strain of the variants of concern out there.
That strong push on exposure sites over the last 2 weeks has been a really important part of understanding the dynamics of this Kappa outbreak and the Delta outbreak.
Public health is so concerned about the Delta variant. It is much more infectious.
Now, these fear-mongering idiots who are reading off a script would have you believe that the Delta variant is worse than and more lethal than Chuck Norris in a Delta Force movie. But the truth is, that's not the case, despite the fact that they say constantly that this thing is so fast-moving that if somebody even looked in your direction, you might get it. Here's what people in Victoria were being told when it wasn't at light.
We're neck and neck with this virus, and it's an absolute beast.
Here's what people in Queensland are being told today.
Unfortunately, with the Delta variant, we're seeing very fleeting contact leading to transmission. If you remember at the start of this pandemic, I spoke about 15 minutes of close contact being a concern. It now looks like it's 5 or 10 seconds that's a concern.
And sadly, even gold standard Gladys is pushing this line.
When you leave your home, at any time of the day, you have to assume that you or somebody in close proximity to you has the virus. And we know from the number of cases that we've seen already in this particular cluster that in some instances, the exchanges have been scaringly fleeting. Literally, people coming within, not even physically touching each other, but literally fleetingly coming into the same airspace has seen the virus transfer from one person to another.
Now, that was on Monday. Here's what they were saying today.
Until the vast majority of our population is vaccinated, these threats will be real and ongoing. And no matter how good we are at dealing with the outbreaks, and this one is still ongoing, the threat is real until the majority of our population is vaccinated.
But here is the data. Here is the reality. New South Wales, Sydney in particular, has been dealing with this for the past 7 days after the health department let a bloke who was not vaccinated drive a flight crew back into hotel quarantine. That is their failure. The driver, sure, a disgrace, but how was he allowed to be the driver? I'll deal with that in the coming days, but I want to deal with these myths tonight. Here's the data. In the past 7 days, there have been 25 cases of coronavirus in mainly Sydney. There have been 194,459 people who have been tested. So put simply, let me explain. All the people who felt crook, knew someone who was crook, or went to any of the places where apparently the crook people had gone. But the total number of people who have been tested but then end up being positive, 0.01% of basically 200,000 people who've been tested. That is exactly the same rate and speed of infection that didn't change for 2 weeks in Victoria, and they went into full lockdown. So here's the deal. You've heard the myths, now here are the truths. It is not all over Sydney. Vaccine must matter, and you must be excluded from the stupid measures being put in place by these panicking premiers. And the Delta strain, yes, while serious if you got it, is not a reason to panic. This isn't my opinion, it's the data, the facts. We'll bring all of this up with the Prime Minister on our program tomorrow night.